Hello everyone at the BALEAP conference. My name's Will Hardman and this is my colleague Rob Playfair.
Hi everyone.
So thank you for choosing to listen to our recorded presentation. We hope you enjoy it and look forward to some discussion in the Q&A. So today we're going to talk about some research that we've been doing, trying to find out about students' perceptions of an online pre-sessional discussion task that we developed last summer. So we're going to begin by giving a few details about our task and also the context of our pre-sessional. We're also going to share later on some of our findings, just a selection of our findings, but a large part of our focus, in line with the theme of today's strand of the conference, which is researching pedagogies. We're going to focus on the methodology and give you some reflections also on our research process and some of the decisions that we took along the way. So I'm going to begin with this quote from Pearson. He wrote quite a comprehensive review of the literature exploring, trying to find out about the effectiveness of pre-sessional courses. So I'll just give you a moment to read that. And the idea here, he's talking about the fact that if we want to be able to evaluate pre-sessional courses, we need to know actually what happens on that pre-sessional course, what's the context, because pre-sessional courses, in reality, although we might think we have an idea of what a pre-sessional is, in reality, they can have different purposes and quite different content. So that's something that Pearson recommends. And so we're going to begin with our pre-sessional context. So today we're going to talk about our summer course, which could be 10 and 6 weeks. This year we had around 300 students. I think the important thing to point out about our pre-sessional is the fact that we have 3 different broad subject areas, which is management, humanities, and science and engineering. And also our assessments is based on Bruce's EAP course design. We did it on textual outcomes, so we have an essay, a presentation, and also a seminar discussion. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because that was the one that last year it underwent the most significant changes and revision, and so we wanted to explore what the impact these changes were having on students as they moved on to their degrees. So here's more contextual details about our task. We did a seminar discussion task which was based on a lecture, and we did this because this kind of task is also one that's quite common in our context at the University of Liverpool. And so we wanted to emulate that as much as possible to make it as authentic as possible. So over the course, the students watch 8 recorded lectures in total, and this leads them towards having 8 15 to 20 minute recorded discussions with their classmates online. Another thing to point out is the fact that we got them to submit notes. That was an important part of the task, and also prepare 5 discussable questions about the lecture. So we were putting emphasis on authenticity and preparation in the task. And finally, our task purpose is also quite important because it was an open-ended purpose where the group had to come together to build shared understanding of the lecture. So we using our task, we then used that task to come up with our intended learning outcomes, and we used the BALEAP can-do framework for assessment and syllabus design, which is a really useful document. And we've already done a presentation quite in depth about that process of how we came up with the intended learning outcomes. So no, we're not going to talk about that here today, but if you're interested in that, then please take a look at our talk at the Leeds listening SIG. They're linked below. But also, an important part of the principles of our course was based on the research of dialogic pedagogy for Robin Alexander. So an example of that is the building on ideas, the first intended learning outcome. And again, as I mentioned before, preparation was an important part of our task, reflected in number 5, taking notes, and also in number 6, so using supplementary materials like pre-reading and the slides. So here's an example of our syllabus, and the only thing to mention here is the fact that, again, it was trying to mirror that authentic process of lecture preparation. So the students would begin the week, they would take notes and watch a lecture, then they would go and do some pre-reading and come up with some discussion questions, working towards the lecture, the seminar discussion towards the end of the week. So Pearson talks about, in that same paper, he talks about the lack of research that's gone on into pre-sessional course effectiveness, and perhaps, you know, we thought this could be related to the, you know, the lack of resource that the universities and senior management are willing to invest in this aspect. And usually the only kind of research that takes place are the end of course surveys, but obviously that's based on the opinions of teachers who are often temporary through no fault of their own, and also students who obviously have limited idea of the context that the students are going on to study in their future degrees. Also, most of this research tends to be quantitative to justify policy decisions, and perhaps that is why it doesn't tend to focus on the learning and teaching that actually takes place on the pre-sessional, which as teachers and course designers, that's what we're interested in. So this leads us to our research question. So how well does our task prepare students for the seminars on their degrees? We looked at 3 aspects: the authenticity of the task, student difficulties, and how useful they thought it was. But today, our findings are going to mainly focus on that first one, task authenticity. Our design, we took a mixed method approach. We started off with some interviews, but then we wanted to explore them a bit more, so we did a follow-up survey. Our approach to questioning, we started with indirect questions because we recognized our role as course designers, and I also taught on the course as well. So we didn't want the students to feel pressured into giving us the answer that they thought we wanted to hear. So we began with indirect, but then later on there were certain aspects of our pre-sessional that we actually really wanted to focus on. So then we started asking a bit more specifically about different aspects of the pre-sessional. Our interviews were coded according to our learning outcomes, and we think this is, you know, one of the really important things to emphasize about our approach, because we had a really close alignment with our research methodology and our learning outcomes, and we used this to find the gaps. So anything that the students talked about that weren't covered by the learning outcomes, we saw those as gaps potentially in our task, and we coded them as emergent themes. And again, like I said, we did a survey to then follow up on that as well. So here's just a visual representation of that coding process that I was talking about. So all of our learning outcomes, what the students said, were coded, and then anything that they said that wasn't covered, we categorized that as emergent themes to explore. This is how we did, how we actually contacted our participants. We sent out an email to the whole cohort, all 300 students. We got a nice range of nationalities, which, although we're not claiming it's a representative study, is reasonably representative of the nationalities that were on the course. And also we got a nice spread too of the different subject areas in management, humanities, and science engineering. The same for the survey as well, same process. We sent out an email, and we managed to get 52 participants, which we were hoping for a little bit more, but we still, you know, that's still 1/6 of the cohort. And again, we got a good spread of the different subject areas. So these are just some examples of our questions. If you want to have our interview script, please get in touch. We're happy to share that with you. But here, this is just trying to show you how we went from indirect questions to more direct questions. So at the top, what do you do before, during, and after a seminar on your degree? So that allowed students to explore this. And then later on, we would actually ask them to specifically compare seminars on their degree to what was similar or different about the seminars they did on the pre-sessional. So now I'm going to hand over to Rob, who's going to tell you about some of our findings.
Thanks, Will. So this table, you can see our learning outcomes ranked by the number of references in the interviews. We kind of grouped ILO 5 and 6, which is about taking notes and preparing questions before a seminar. We kind of grouped them together, and you can see there's 45 references to them in our interviews. Similarly, turn-taking, building ideas were often also referenced quite a lot. Whereas the other ILOs were only referenced, a few times, and not by all students. At the bottom of the table, with the asterisks, are 2 of the emergent themes that Will was talking about earlier. There were quite a few other ones, but the asking questions and the different purposes of seminars are 2 that we wanted to share today, because they were mentioned a lot in the interviews. So just to give you an example of how we coded them, we're going to look at a few extracts. This is one from a student. I'll just let you have a read. So here we actually coded this with 2 different ILOs. So the first point there is about preparation and preparing the questions, and then that linked to critical thinking, another ILO. Interestingly, this was a common pattern when students talked about preparation, it was often linked to another learning outcome. We have a look at another example. So here we've got building on ideas. So this idea of following the previous contents, we relate it to building on ideas because it involved the student having to listen to the discussion in order to find a relevant kind of contribution to what had been said before. So we felt that really well linked with building on ideas. However, the last point about finding the space, waiting for the space, we coded that as turn taking, because that kind of tapped into this idea of being able to take the floor and hold the floor in a point in the discussions. So we wanted to kind of have a look at how generalizable these interview findings were. So we kind of paraphrased each of the learning outcomes to ask a slightly more direct question. So we asked students how often they did these activities in seminars on their degrees. And you can see we gave a scale from never to very often. And you can see we've also given an example for each of the learning outcomes. We didn't call it learning outcomes, but we gave an example for each one, just so some of the abstract ideas, for example, building on people's ideas, we could give a kind of a more concrete example for students. You can see at the bottom, we've also got asking questions, and that wasn't a learning outcome, but it was such a frequent emergent theme in our interviews that we wanted to include it in here. So in terms of results, you can see over here, this is the, at the bottom, we've got the different learning outcomes, and on the y-axis, we've got the frequency. So that's from never to very often. Well, in line with the interview results, preparation was the most frequently cited thing that students do. So that's bordering on to strongly, very frequently that they prepare for seminars. In contrast, although turn taking was quite frequently mentioned in the interviews, it didn't come out as particularly more frequent than any of the other learning outcomes. In fact, less than some of the others that didn't come up in the interview. So we found that quite an interesting contrast from the interview results. Okay, so one of the emergent themes that we hadn't really anticipated was almost dichotomous understandings of seminar purpose, and this was kind of framed by the students in the interviews. So you can see over here we've got some students talked about the seminars being a chance to learn from each other, to learn from classmates, whereas others talked about it in a much more kind of instrumental way of going to get particular answers from the teacher and not really seeing the dialogic purposes of seminars. And again, you can see the contrast between building knowledge or just doing it to pass the course. We've got a quote at the bottom to illustrate that. We've got that quote, Will? Yeah. There we are. So this one with the student explicitly mentions that there's not much discussion between classmates, and the idea is that you ask the teacher questions or you have a conversation with the teacher. So for us, that kind of put that on that dichotomy of, you know, getting answers from the teacher rather than learning from each other. So we were kind of interested in this, and we were wondering whether perhaps it was a disciplinary influence, so we kind of phrased a question. We paraphrased each of these different purposes as we understood them from the interview, and we phrased the question as I attend seminars to do these different purposes. And you can see the scale we've got is strongly disagree to strongly agree. The answers we looked at, we split them by those different subject areas. So we've got the humanities in blue, science in red, and business in grey. And the y-axis here is how strongly they agree with the different seminar purposes. I mean, the most striking thing for us was the fact that students have a wide range of purposes for seminars, and that in terms of disciplinary differences, we were it confounded our kind of expectations in that science students seem to value all the different purposes more. In terms of language development, so in terms of developing their speaking skills, so in terms of the you know, preparing for their assignments and getting you know, that directly linked to scoring marks and doing well in their assignments. Interesting, humanities on that question, humanities agreed with it far less, and they saw the connection with their assignments far less, which might be an interesting area to explore further. Okay, so finally, just in line with the kind of strand of this talk, we wanted to kind of reflect briefly on the methodology we used. Some of the benefits we thought was aligning our questions with the ILOs, both in terms of coding the responses, but also framing follow-up survey questions, because it really helped us see the relevance of our course and where the gaps were, as Will was talking about earlier. Also, using the mixed methods helped us to kind of temper some of the findings from the interview that could have potentially led us off in a wrong direction, and it helped us see the sort of some of the the things that were generalizable and the things that weren't. And the use of indirect questions really we think helped us to avoid the trap of students just telling us what we want to hear, which is the pre-sessional is amazing, and by kind of just doing a more kind of descriptive responses to about their experiences, helped us kind of align their experiences with our task a bit more accurately, maybe. And the two areas that we'd like to do further research in is looking at more close linguistic analysis of students' seminars on their degrees, and using the ILOs to do that, and also comparing students' experiences with pre-sessional students' experiences with non-pre-sessional students' experiences, and again perhaps using our ILOs and looking for gaps there, and what are non-pre-sessional students' experiences, and how are they different, and what does that tell us about our course and the benefits that it gives to our students. The Tarashke and Wahid study there is a really good example of how that could work. So I think we've got a call, Will, now. Yeah. Let's end with a call. Okay, so finally, the call is really to break out of the pre-sessional bubble and to see the pre-sessional course evaluation as part of the whole picture of the student journey when they're at the university. So although of course end of course surveys are important, think about it in terms of their whole degree experience, and not just from the students themselves, but also from the teachers who work with them, the professional service staff who support them as well. And finally, collaborate with us, with other EAP practitioners, with people across the university and the students, in order to get a really good understanding of what students need and how effective the pre-sessional courses are. Thanks very much for your time. We hope to discuss this further in our Q&A.